Hi, my name is Jennifer Fairbanks and I am the owner of Porcelynne. And today I'm actually going to be showing you how to do a fit sample for the new Willowdale Bra by Cashmerette. So I'm going to show you this sample I made, and I know this is a small sample, but it was easy enough to actually film. So this sample has some things that you wouldn't actually have on the finished bra. First of all, you can see that I've safety pinned the straps. But another important thing that I've done is I've actually made it so the cups were inserted after we did the channeling. This way you can make sure that everything fits correctly. So we can make different fit assessments on the band as well as the cup. And this is easy enough that you can actually switch the cups out if we need to make modifications to the actual cup. The band is also done in two parts. So it's done in left and right. And at the very end, right before we actually put it all together, we then determine how wide the bridge needs to be, because the spacing of most ready-to-wear bras is about 3/4 of an inch, and not all bodies are created with that space. So when I demonstrate, we do the two sides separately, and then we discuss how to actually figure out what the spacing is between the breasts that you need. And then we tack down the top, and then we leave it to try on, and then close the center bridge to make sure that we don't need to open it up for a flared rib cage. So when we approach the fit on the bra, we tackle it in several different aspects. You want to make sure that the band is fitting well around the rib cage, around the bridge, and you also want to make sure that the cups are fitting well. And so when you do a fit sample with kind of in bits and pieces, you can actually take, and it's easier for you to modify the pattern and go back and change something. And if this fits you perfect just as is, I suppose you can wear this, but this is also going to be your learning sample. So if you've actually never made a bra before, this will really kind of help you hone in on your skills on how to sew with 1/4 inch seam allowances and how to work with really slippery fabric. So when making a fit sample, we don't really want to use our good materials quite yet because you never know if there needs some adjustments for your body. And since you're doing this for yourself, you might as well make this as customized as possible. So we're going to first cut the tricot so we can kind of do our fit sample. So the pattern pieces we're going to need for that is this one. Let's see, this one. Where'd my cut pattern go? Okay. So the top cup, it uses a lace, and this uses a power net. So these two we're going to set aside. And so we're going to cut these 4 patterns. Now you'll notice I'm using a smaller size. I'm actually using one for my sister. So it's it'll be easier for you to see rather me do one for myself, and I'd be using all of the fabric. Okay, so for when I do a fit sample, I actually like to add a little extra to my center front and assemble my left and right of the bra separately so I can make sure that I can kind of get that fit right around the waist of the band done correctly. So in lieu of doing this on the fold for your first sample, I'm actually going to cut 2 of them. Now, because I'm on a smaller size, I can just double my fabric, kind of fold it over and cut them at the same time. If you are using a larger size, you're going to want to be really strategic with how you place your pieces. And sometimes it's not always exactly what the layout shows. So you want to kind of see what you can fit where. And we want to use as little amount of fabric as possible. So we like to kind of start at one end. So if you notice here, you'll see dogs. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be lining up the dogs going from, this is the selvage, the finished edge, in which the dogs means the direction of greatest stretch. So there is stretch here. So I'm going to try and get as close as I can over here. And then we have, let's see, the dogs goes this way here. So let's see what we can get and nest them. Oop, I want to give myself that 2 inches here. So actually I'm going to start with this over here so I have a little bit to start with. I said I like just extra, and the reason I do this is because sometimes some people's rib cages are a little bit flared, and if they're a little flared, we actually may need to increase the bottom down here, which I have to do. I actually have to add like 3/4 of an inch on the fold for myself. So this is just one way that we're going to start this. I'm going to use a non-stretch lining to line the band itself. So because I'm doing that, it doesn't really matter which direction this one's going to be for this. Now, if you're going to be using this, your tricot for both directions, like so for your lining and yourself, then for yourself, you're going to do it in this direction. But if you're using the non-stretch, you can actually do this in any direction because this is going to stabilize it so nothing's going to move. So I'll go for what the instructions are. So dogs for mane, we'll set that there. Okay, dogs for mane. And for mane. And for mane. Okay. So you can see we can get a good nest of patterns in here. And if you're really careful, you can probably even get, let's see if we can do that better. That's even better. So we can use very little fabric or as little amount of fabric as possible. And so we want to make sure that this line goes perpendicular to your selvage over here. So for those of you that are very experienced in using a rotary blade, you can go ahead and cut these with the rotary. The one thing you're going to want to do for the fitting is we're going to add just a little bit extra here. So you can use pattern weights, you can use pins. Pattern weights are always handy, although if you have giant pattern weights like this, it could actually affect how it's moving. So I'm going to, I got that down flat. I'm going to start over here and I'm going to add just, like I said, I'm going to come over here and about 2 inches right there. You're like, well, that's really crazy looking. Yes, it is. But this will give us a little of that extra ability to test the fit. And what I'm also going to do is I'm just going to kind of take this angle and keep going up. So I have one of each of these. Okay, and most of these fabrics do have a right side and a wrong side. So if we want to make sure we're doing the opposite, so when we do the second piece, let's start with this one, we can actually just kind of set it on top like this. And that way we cut out each side. So if I line this up, okay, where is it? Or you can flip your fabric over and do it the other direction. So that is in that direction. And so I really wanted to use the fabric as the guide, so I could have just taken the fabric off and laid the fabric on there, but I wanted to make sure that I had the same amount of extra on here for that bridge. So this one is all ready to for the outer layer. And then you're going to do the same for everything else. I'm going to set this one aside. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get my stable piece out. And this is really the only piece you can actually stabilize any of the cut pieces that you want. But note that it will affect the fit if you don't do this on the final fabric. So what we can do is we can take and fold this. And if you end up needing a lot, have a much larger size, you can honestly kind of nest one this direction, get the other one in this direction. So you have a little bit of room to play on here. And even if you don't even have enough of this fabric, what you could do is you can actually just cut a little stable piece in the front, but we won't get into that one. So we're just going to we're going to double this. I'm going to conserve my fabric, and I'm going to line this right up on top of it. So now I'm going to show you my secret weapon, a glue stick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, just for this fitting, I'm going to glue these two pieces together. It'll make our lives easier. When you're dealing with the actual sew along, the full one, we're not going to glue this one to this yet because we need to clean finish the top of it. So what we can do is we can put strategic glue, and just to note, these things do dry out quite quickly. So if you have, so kind of just dab it in several places. It will go through because this is kind of like a screen. So it'll stick to your table. So you just have to clean your table up afterwards and store these in a plastic baggie. Okay, right and wrong. Let's see, I think this is my right. So it might be hard to see the fabric underneath. But then just take a second, kind of, oh, that one's not quite on there. And the reason why I added it to the non-stretch part is that it won't stretch the fabric out. If you did that on the fabric, it could kind of distort the fabric a little bit. Okay, where's the other piece I had? So we've got these parts ready. So we can set these ones aside, let them dry, and then you can finish cutting. Assume I've already cut the other piece of this one, the other piece of this one, and the other piece of this one. And I'm going to do that off screen, but I wanted to show you this part first. Okay, so set that to the side. And then we've got our band. So we have our band here, and you can see stretch here and stretch here. And this one really has almost the same stretch this way. So I'm actually going to do my cuts. I'm going to cut two in this direction. You can kind of see the edges are curling a little bit. The lines look like they're going across a little bit more. And I cut the selvages off because sometimes power nets behave a little bit differently depending on how they're made. Now I'm going to use this lace. This isn't the one I'm going to do in the actual tutorial, but we'll be able to see. Where is that top cut pattern? Okay, and then what I like to do is actually take this fabric, flip it over, and we want to match up the scallop perfectly. Now that I've cut all of my outer layer pieces, then we can go in and we want to start tackling the lining. Now you can use the self fabric, which some kits have enough of to do that. But what I actually like to do is I like to do a lining fabric because it helps me realize what is what. So it's a little bit on the sheer side. And in the kits that I have sent out, there's actually two pieces of this. So if you've got your two pieces, make sure that you've kind of got the stretch lined up the same. And the stretch is the same kind of direction of stretch that the tricot has. So since these ones don't necessarily have selvages on them, I'm going to line these up right on top of each other. That way I can cut both at the same time. And there is, if you really feel at it, there's kind of a right and a wrong side, but I can never figure it out once I actually have them on because they're both pretty soft. So I'm not worried about that. And so here, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of do these in the opposite direction. So the dogs are in the opposite direction. So we can do it like this. And lining. So we actually are not going to be using a lot of this fabric. So if you do have the two pieces and you have a smaller cup, you can certainly just use one of the pieces. I think I'm going to do that just for the sake of saving fabric. So still pretend you've got the two layers on top of each other. Okay, then lining. go in that direction. Okay, so now I have all 4 pieces for my power bar. I have all 4 pieces of this one, and I actually accidentally did not cut one in the correct direction, but this is a fit sample, so this is where we get to make mistakes. And then we have all 4 pieces for here. And then we have these fully stabilized. So you can see I'm tugging them. They're gonna be fine. So once you have everything cut and prepped, oh, and then my lace over here, then we can begin assembling your first bra. So to begin working on the fitting portion, we actually need to do the band, construct most of the band first. So with the regular construction, we're actually going to be clean finishing the top here between the 2 layers. Here we glued them together just to do the fit. So I'm going to take my back, and then we actually need to attach the side. So we're going to just pin these together on our sides. So with the right sides together, this doesn't really have a right and a wrong side, so this side doesn't really make a difference, but this one will. And then your seam allowance on this side is 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to be showing you a short little clip that I'm actually going to be wearing a GoPro on my chest, so it might be a little bit bumpy, but it's the best way to show you on a home machine, which is I have in the other room. So we're going to be using my daughter's sewing machine because this is a home machine, so it'll be a little bit easier to show. We're going to be doing most of our stitches with the straight stitch, although when we attach the elastics we'll be using the zigzag, and I'll show you kind of what I use. So this foot is actually 1/4 of an inch from where the needle is to the edge. So for my foot, I can use this as my guide. Now, you'll notice, and if you haven't sewn this type of fabric before, it can actually get eaten by the machine. So what I always like to do is I like to start sewing something else first. And that way, we don't have to actually start stitching right on the edge of our pattern piece. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to stitch this. Plus it'll help me make sure that I've got the stitch in the correct length and everything else. And I'm doing black thread so you can see. And then I'm going to get it over here, and then I'm just going to get this under, kind of giving a nice little gap, and then I'm going to start sewing. Now you can certainly do a back stitch right now. We're going to be doing this is a fit sample, and we're going to be putting elastic at the top and at the bottom. So we are going to be reinforcing these seams. So at this point, you don't necessarily need to do a back stitch, especially if your machine is prone to eating your fabric. So I'm just going to keep going and go right along. I didn't cut very straight, so I am just going to be evening up my cutting with my sewing. Okay, and then since I've already got something in the machine, excuse me, I can actually just pick right up, kind of take that off the edge, pull that foot up, and then continue. So I'm not giving the machine enough time to eat the ends, if you want to call it that. Okay, so we can evaluate. Let's see, I think I've got a blade on here, don't I? Yeah, I don't. So it didn't eat it at either the top or the bottom, so this looks good. I'm going to go ahead and snip my fabric apart, and I'm going to grab my band elastic, because I'm going to do the band elastic first. So this is a band elastic. This is actually just one I had sitting on my table, and this isn't even really this isn't one of the ones that are in the kit. It's just one I have laying around. This one is the 1/2 inch, so I'm doing this, which would be the correct size for the smaller. My daughter's sewing room doesn't always have everything in here. Okay, so I got that put aside. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually wanting to put a zigzag stitch on here. So I like to do, so on here, you can see, and your machines may be a little different, you want to have an average stitch length. So I like to keep mine at about 10 to 12. This machine I've done a little bit of modification, so the 12 is actually kind of small, so I keep a little bit right below the 12. And then we're going to do the width. We can actually do even the full width of the elastic. I don't think we need that, so I'm actually going to do about halfway between 2 and 3. So the trick that I like to do, and so actually how the elastic is going to be attached, is it's going to be attached on the right side of the fabric. So when we flip it, it'll be flipped to the wrong side. And we also need to be aware of which side we want to have flipped to the inside. So you want to have the brushed side facing up on the right side. So it's going to come in through like this. So I'm going to put this in my machine. I'm going to set it in here, and I'm going to just go ahead and get the zigzags started. And this way we can kind of see, oh, do we need to make any adjustments? Okay, that's a good width of it. Try and get it in a good position. And then I'm going to take and I'm going to line this up, kind of slide it right underneath the edge of this elastic, and then line it up to the bottom, and then let it go. Now I am not pulling this elastic at all. I'm just letting it sit, go straight. I'm just lining it up to the bottom. So we do have a little bit of an angle here. So when we get about to this point, we just want to kind of slowly kind of squeeze and adjust around the band shape. So hopefully you can kind of see. I'm trying to put the camera a little higher. That's important. We don't, and this is your fit sample, so you can play around with kind of controlling the elastic, and don't worry too much about where you're stitching on it, because we're going to be flipping it so you have the little decorative edge when you're done. Okay. Now that I just showed you one piece, now I'm going to show you how you really should be doing it. So when we're on here and we get this lined up, when we're stitching, we actually want to be stitching as close to the picot, but not over this little picot edge. So that way it'll be nice and easy to turn. And we want to be very consistent with how we are doing this. So I'm just kind of focusing, finding a point on my elastic that I'm looking at through the needle. I know it's a little tricky, but I take it slow, no need to rush on this. So this is pretty much how you're going to be doing it for the rest of the bra as well. I'm actually just going to I'm not going to cut anything apart. I'm just going to come back over here. Now we're going to take and we're going to fold this back, and we're going to do this zigzag stitch again. Okay, now we're just gonna double check it's all done. Oops, get caught. And this is pretty much done at this point. I'm gonna go and sit back at the table and show you what the next step is. So before we move on to making the cup, let's discuss about the band. So we know that there's a lot of extra stuff right here, and we're gonna get rid of this, but we wanna kind of do a few more things first. There is a chance that once you sew the cup together, you may need to tweak the cup a little bit. So maybe you need to go down a size, or maybe you need to kind of narrow it a little bit, but you won't know until you actually sew the cup. So if you want to make this whole process easy, so you can go in and modify the cup and then come back and change it into the band, so we don't have to start from scratch again and do the band again, we can actually kind of skip a little step. And we can go ahead and attach the underwire casing to the band itself. Now this is not what you would do on the finished garment, because if you did this on the finished garment, you wouldn't have a clean finish around your wire line. So the wire line itself, we have at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So what we want to do is we want to take our casing and we want to sew it around with that 1/4 inch all the way around, just on the band itself. And so you may need to strategically pin this, or if you're really good at marking it, you can do it that way. Okay, so we do have a right and a wrong side of the casing. The really brushed side, that is the right side, that's the side you want against your skin. So we were going to put the other side towards the band. And just like I showed you how we started sewing on the elastic first, I'm going to do the same thing. Make sure you turn off your zigzags. And I'm going to start stitching on my casing just so I make sure that I've got it attached. So then I can take and line this up. Okay, so we know we've got that 1/4 inch right there. And so you can use this as your guide, use your foot. And if anything, you can do it just a little bit to this way of that 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to go around and do a second row of stitching on the other side of this. So I'm going to do this to the other side of the band as well. And I don't need to show it to you again, so I will be back with that completed. Okay, now that I've got my band prepped, I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to trim off some stuff. So this bra is not going to be one that you will ever wear, because like I said, it's for fitting. I'm going to trim up the ends just to kind of make things a little bit neater and less messy looking. And then we can set this to the side, because we're not gonna attach anything to this until we've got the cut made. So let's go ahead and clean that. Okay, so now we are going to begin working on the cup. So once you kind of get things lined up, so you have right and left, then we're going to work on assembly. So I set these down. So these two pieces we're going to put with the right sides together. And I may have just flipped that. I can't really tell right this second. And we're going to line up our edges. And you can line up your notch. If you do the notch, just do a tiny little snip. All the pieces should line up correctly. So really the notches are there to help you make sure that you are attaching pieces to the right pieces. Okay, so we have this piece here. And so we had started by doing it this way. Well, for this side, we're actually going to flip them and pin the other direction, because we want to have a clean finish in here. So it makes sense to do both the lining and the self at the same time, so we keep everything in the right place. And so because these pieces, this is really just a fit, but you want to get your process down to know what you're doing correctly or incorrectly. So we want to make sure we don't have two left cups or two right cups. And if you do, well, you'll have to test the fit with one inside out. But this way it'll help you kind of come up with a process that works for you when you're actually pinning things together. But it's really, really important to have a right and a left. And if on this this sample, what you can even do is you could just write on them. Since this is not one you're ever going to wear, you can write which is the, up and down. You can mark the notches with a pen. This is really for you to just confirm that you don't need to make any other changes, because so we've got that one. They look like opposites, so I know I did those two correctly. And so this has the square piece on top, so if I do it like this, then that will be correct. Now I'm going to take these 4 pieces and I'm going to sew these on my sewing machine and then come back so we can attach the top cups to them. So now here we're going to take and we're going to attach this Okay. And so what we can do is we can stitch that down, or make things a little bit easier for you. We can actually do this in one step. So actually we're sandwiching this lace in between these two layers. So as long I'll reconvene at the machine and let you know what to do after we sew these two pieces together. So after sewing the two layers together, I pulled them both away from the lace and then I pressed it right along this edge. That way I could get a nice crisp edge to it. And then I'm going to take with my fingers and I want to really try and kind of smooth it out to the outside edges from the top to the bottom. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be stitching around the outside edge just to kind of secure it and keep it from shifting. And when you smooth it with your fingers, it also helps kind of make sure that, hey, if you didn't cut it or sew it correctly, then things will line up how they're supposed to be. So we don't want to force the edges to line up if they don't actually fit together because of your cutting. And I'm just going to run a stitch around the outside at just like around 1/8 of an inch, so right on the edge, enough to kind of keep them together. And we can do a basting stitch over here. So here I'm just going to make my stitch as large as possible. For me, that is a 6. And depending on how your machine is, and because we're starting it inside the pattern and not on the edge, it should not eat your fabric. So we'll get back over to the table and finish up with the power bar. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the lining aside for a small moment, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to line this up over here. Now here we do have some notches that we need to kind of look at. So if you see right here, right where this angle changes, that's where we actually want to use that as our guide to line up to the top. So you can use that as a notch, or you can just use that angle change. So I'm going to take that angle change right there and line that up to the edge of the lace. Get that pinned. And if you do have got the other notch in there, it should line up to that point right there. And then what I usually like to do is then take at the bottom. Am I doing the right side? Then I'll take and kind of come down here to the bottom, because at this point, remember that stitch I just did could actually be pulling the fabric a little bit. So I do the top little bit up to the seam, I pin at the bottom, and then we want to try and kind of find the middle, because these should line up well. And actually maybe I'll kind of keep that one, because you do kind of have a bit of a concave convex thing going on right here. So we want to distribute this fabric in here, and it is likely that those stitches I just did pulled the seam a little bit. So we're going to try and we're going to ease them in so the seam lines themselves line up. Not necessarily the outside edges are the same length, but the seam lines. So you can see it when I first started doing it, looked like it was going to be a lot bigger than it was, and it's really not. It looks like a little bit of ease, but all it is just distribute that in there. Okay, so once you have that, well, then we can flip this over, and we can do this same thing by sandwiching this between the layers. Now, if this is not something that you're comfortable doing or you think you're able to do, then I would definitely do this in 2 steps. Okay, I'm going to stitch this. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to stitch this top part of the angle. So right here, you see this piece here? So I'm going to start stitching up here, and then I've got my lace that hits here. So I'm going to stitch quarter here, come over here and all the way down. And then I'll be back because I don't think I need to show that part on the machine. So I just sandwiched these pieces and I was ironing this one, and it looks like it, for the most part, it looks okay. My ends are a little bit off. You know, I'm not too worried about this. This is about as accurate I am. And then I realized I got over here and I accidentally sewed over my fabric. So I just wanted to show you that even the experts make mistakes. So I'm going to go ahead and fix this. I don't need to show you how I fix it. And then what I want you to do is, when I go through, just like we kind of smooth the other pieces of the cup out, we're going to smooth this part of the cup out as well. Pin around the edges, and then we can baste these outer two pieces together. So you can then baste around just right on the edge over here and down to this curve. And because we have this little bit of a kind of a goof or buff, I just clip that off and there we go. And so once you finish basting this, then we're ready to test this into the band. So I have my cups finished and basted, and then I have my band kind of up to this point. Now, we don't want to completely assemble the bra because if we're going to be fitting this, we want to be able to take the cups out if we need to. So we're going to do this in kind of a slightly different order. This is not how you're going to do it for the final bra. I want to actually add elastic to the back neckline on both of these. And then we're going to add the strap to the back and hook it and basically pin it on the front. That way we're not having to rip out too many stitches when we, if we have to change out the cup. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab more of my band elastic, the 1/2 inch one, and we're going to do it with the plush side up just like we did on the band. We're going to stitch this across with a zigzag and then fold it down with a zigzag, and it's going to fold over with the casing. It will be a little bit thick here, so don't worry about that. We're going to be inserting the wires in the front, so the underwire is actually not going to be finished in the correct order as well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go sew this one on my machine, zigzag this way, zigzag here, again plush side up, go around this side, come back, and then we can work on putting on the elastic piece in the back with the hook and eye. And then the last step I'm going to do is actually be putting in the cups. I'm now going to work on putting this elastic on the back strap. So when we're going to be sewing it, we're actually going to be kind of leaning it right against the edge, and we're going to be forcing it to turn in kind of a curve right on the edge at the strap. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to try and start at my center back, and I'm going to do 2 little rows of zigzags right along it, so on this side and then on the inside of it. And then at the very top, we want to leave about 1.5 inches. That way we can put in the ring and flip it back to finish it. So I'm going to go over and set up at the machine. So I'm going to show you how to do this right at the machine. So to add this on, we need to make sure that we have a zigzag. Now this one I'm going to do in a much kind of narrower zigzag. So I'm kind of going like a little bit smaller, just so it's not as wide. And my stitch length is fine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and we can always start. I really like to start sewing with my elastic, sewing on the elastic, because when something like that happens, you're not kind of having a big mess to start with. Okay, let's see. Okay, so get that started again. This way you also make sure that you have the stitch, the correct stitch. So I'm going to put that down, lift this up. And I'm lining this right along the edge. So I'm only controlling a little bit at a time. It's not moving. And so I'm kind of forcing these pieces to stay straight. Actually, I can come here and I can just zigzag straight across. It's not the prettiest finish, but at least you can do this on the fit sample. Okay, then I pivot again, and then we bring this back down so we can support the other side of the elastic. And you can see I did not sew a very straight line, but this is why we're doing a fit sample first, so you can practice. Okay, so then this is going to need to be at least 1.5 inches to flip over like this. So I'm going to cut this, and no, I know you're not supposed to use these, but I am for the sake of that one. Okay, for this one, and the same thing. Then we can take and we can put our ring. So kind of put a ring through this, and then we're going to bring this over. I want to bring this down probably as far as that neckline elastic is. Just going to stick that in here. So if you want to really have kind of a clean finish to this elastic, you can actually kind of zigzag on the edge of it. So you could even do that kind of before you sew it down. For the sake of this one, I'm just going to come in here and stitch it down. And I'm not even going to do a, I'm just going to do a straight stitch. And of course it pulled my thread out again. Even with glasses, this is a challenge sometimes. Okay, so once I've got that there, take my pin out. And then I'm just going to do kind of a back stitch, go over it. It sounds like my bobbin's getting messed up. It is. I think my bobbin's almost out. So I now have kind of a loop on that piece, and then I can do the same thing over here. So now I'm going to work on the hook and eye. On this piece, so we can kind of see, on the left side, we're going to be taking our hook and eye and adding it to here. And so we can open up this, and we want to overlap it, kind of shove it inside. And you can see sometimes if it's a little high, well, we could have trimmed that down a little bit, or what I like to do is I just give it a little pleat to fit in there. So I like it to line up at the top and the bottom. So you can see right now it's kind of coming below, so I'm going to force it in there. Now when I get this started, I'll make sure I have a long enough thread. This I stitch down with a straight stitch. You can always go back and do a zigzag right on the edge, but for assembling these, kind of get it in, get your needle down, line this in, and here I'm just going to have a little tiny pleat in there, just because I didn't trim mine down. So you can go back, do a little back stitch, and then come down here. Okay. And we're going to take the other side. And this side, the hook needs to go down. So what we do is we then flip this over and open this up. Now, the easiest way to do this is to offset the needle. And can I do that on this machine? I don't think I can on this machine. So what I would do is, if you can't offset the needle, then put on a zipper foot. And I'm going to reverse it, because it is really, really tricky to not actually hit the metal. The metal on these comes all the way out here, so you've only got about 1/8 of an inch to play with. So we're going to take this, we're going to shove that inside, kind of inside the whole thing, line it up to the top. And this may be a little bit difficult to get started, so I'm actually, did I pull my thread out? I almost did.
some machines are a little trickier, and it looks like this side grew quite a bit. I'm not going to be back stitching immediately. I just want to get this down. And what you can do is once you've kind of got this down, you can switch back to a regular needle and then just readjust where the center. That's the problem when you have a zipper foot, is that it doesn't really have anything to grip on. So hopefully your machines are a little bit easier and can do a let's see, how did that go? Oh, that is terrible, but you know, it's secured temporarily. This side did not get tacked down, so I'm actually going to run over that one more time. So I usually use my other machine that is, it's an industrial, but it has it so you can offset it, and it is much cleaner if you can actually have both sides of the foot down. So kind of it's secured on both sides. Then it's a little bit easier to manage. So I'm just going to come back in here, just so when I'm trying it on, it doesn't rip. And this is not our final bra, so this can look as messy as you want. And this is where you can really kind of perfect your skills and see what's the best method. This is acceptable for a fit sample. So then what you kind of do is we make sure that you've sewn them in the right direction so you can hook them just like that. Okay. I'm going to go back to the table so I can show you how to assemble the rest of the strap, and then we can get the cup in.
Now to assemble the other half of the strap, grab your elastic, and sorry, this is just one I had laying around because I didn't bring any more of the white home. And we're going to cut 2 lengths. Oop, I don't need that right there. 2 lengths of, let's say 16 inches. So, okay. So now this piece, we actually we need to put this hook on, or this slide on. So what we're going to do, we're going to slide this through with the shiny side up through there. So we have that piece where, so again, shiny side up, slide it through the slide, and then we can take and fold this down, and then we need to stitch this closed. So we'll be sewing this, stitching that down. So I'm going to go do that. I don't need to do that on camera. I'll just do a quick little back stitch right there, and I'll be right back so we can finish assembling the strap. Okay, now we have our slide attached to the strap. Now this way, what we're going to do next, and I always end up doing this twice because I never do it correctly. I believe, because I have done this a ton of times in the last few days. Okay, we're going to have the back side of the elastic. So I'm looking at the front side of the bra, looking at the back side of the strap. I'm going to put it through the ring from the back. I'm going to come up and go through one side of the slide and go back through the other side of the slide. And there we have our adjustable strap. Okay, do that again. So the back side of the strap, come through the back side of the ring. We come up through the slide, back through the slide. Okay, so now the band is pretty much ready for us to assemble the cups. So because we have put this casing in, we're going to just have to be really careful that we don't sew onto the case. We really just want to sew right on the edge. So this is going to be a little bit of a challenge, but it doesn't have to be pretty. And when you actually sew it on here, I want you to sew it with a basting stitch. Okay, so now we're going to make sure that we got the right sides on the right side so we don't sew the cups into the wrong way. Okay, so because we have not turned down, we have not finished the front, and we have finished here, but this is not finished, things are going to line up a little bit differently. So we're going to have this side, so the underarm is actually going to extend kind of, if you can kind of look to see where your fabric actually turned down from when you did the elastic, that's as far as you want it to kind of extend up past. So let me get one right at the end. So I have mine extending by about 1/4 of an inch because that's kind of where I finished my elastic. This over here is supposed to finish kind of right below. So I'm actually going to start this 1/4 of an inch below at the center front. Okay, so I went ahead and I just got the front and the side pinned. And then I'm just going to work on kind of working my way through it. So this should, you can actually kind of take from one end to the other and line them up. So there's that cup. Then I'm going to come over here again. So remember, I'm going to, because this is just fitting, I'm going to line this up 1/4 of an inch from the top. So that's about 6 millimeters from the top. This side, I'm going to extend the underarm just past the elastic by about 1/4 of an inch. Pin that in. Come back over here. Now I'm not going to show you this sewing it in on the camera just because there's really no special technique to doing it. I do it on the side that the casing is, so that way I can try and get as close and I can make sure that the casing itself doesn't kind of slide in the teeth like on the bottom of the foot. So I'm going to try and get as close as I can right next to that casing and stitch all the way around. I'm not going to do a back stitch on either one, but I am going to do a basting stitch. And the reason why is that we want to make it easy enough to take out in case we need to make an adjustment. So I'm going to go ahead and baste those 2 cups in, and then we're almost ready to do our fit. Okay, I've got my cups in. They look pretty good. I don't have any pleats. You likely may have a pleat the first time you sew it in, so you can always go in and seam rip just a little bit. So now we're going to kind of finish up this sample so we can actually test the fit. So the wires go in with the colored tip towards the center front. Most of the time, most manufacturers do this. On occasion, I've seen some that have the color tip to the outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the non-colored tip and I'm going to put it in at the center front. Just slide that all the way into the casing and push it down as far as I can so it comes over here. And then get that in. What I would like to discuss is the spacing between the breast. So the spacing of the wires at the center front could be a very crucial part of the fit. The pattern on its own gives spacing so the 2 pieces of channeling can sit right next to each other, just like this. So it's about a 3/4 of an inch width at that center front. Now, not everybody has that same type of spacing. So if you were to take and kind of just support your breast and take a pencil, so you just kind of hold your breast up, so you can't really see, I'll hold my breast up, and then you take a pencil and you kind of slide it between. If that pencil is sitting against your rib cage and there is no room left and right before you hit breast tissue, then we actually want to adjust this so the casing is right on top of each other, because we want to make sure that the wires don't really sit on the breast tissue, but we want them to sit between the breast. So the closest we can get them is, right here at that bridge on top of each other. Now, if you don't even have room for a pencil, well, that is a slightly different fit problem, and you'd probably end up needing to go with a demi wire, so something that is shorter, but this video is not about that. This is really just about trying to figure out the spacing that we have between our breasts. So if you have a pencil spacing or about a 1-finger spacing between your breast, you're going to overlap your casing right here at the top. So the casing at the top is on top of each other. And then we're going to stitch that down at the top just to secure it. And it doesn't have to be it needs to be able to hold the whole bra together, but anticipate that you may have to take it out. So be careful with this. So you want to stitch here. Now, if you can fit, let's say, 2 fingers between the breast, Then you've got that good 3/4 inch spacing. Or maybe that's a little bit more like a finger. My fingers seem very, very fat compared to this. But if you have no spacing, you put it on top of each other. If you have some spacing, you can put it here. And if you actually have a really wide set spacing, you can set it so it could be as far, I've seen as far apart as 1.5 inches at that bridge. So this is really where you kind of, when you put the wire up, and actually what you could even do at this point is actually put the different sides right up to your body. So you've got them assembled up to the body and figure out how close at the bridge do they need to be. And so this can really be your first fitting. So you're not putting this whole thing on yet, you're just kind of putting this in on the breast root, and then we're going to try and see how close we need that bridge to be. So for my sister, I know that she has kind of average space, so I'm just going to fold down one side of this bridge, kind of right in the middle, right at the edge of the casing. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to line it up so the casing edges butt up against each other. Now this is going to be the average spacing. For larger breasts, you may end up having to do what's on top of each other. And I want to show you just briefly. Now I've already dissected and butchered this bra. This is one that I did for myself because I was actually testing a new band and I wanted to make sure that things fit. So I've already kind of pulled off and recycled everything off this bra that I was able to, but you can see where I have it tacked down. So I am really close together, so I actually had to tack mine down on top of each other. Now the reason we do this is because sometimes the rib cage, doesn't matter how big we are, but sometimes our rib cages may flare. So we have a real tiny underbust, but even within 1/2 inch to 1 inch below the underbust, it starts to flare out. And when that happens, what we can do is we can put this on. Once we tack this down, then you can actually put this on and kind of play around and see where it fits on the body. And then you may be pulling it tighter like here, or you may be opening it up like this, because some people's ribs flare that much that they may actually need to have more room at the rib cage. So this little hack that we're doing just shows you and gives you the opportunity to adjust this. And then once you have figured this out, then we can come in here and, stitch this down, and then you can compare onto the pattern. You want to see, okay, well, this is definitely, it's going to be a little bit wider. Probably if I kept it like this, it would probably be about 1/4 inch wider at here. So ideally you have them so they're absolutely in the center. It's going to be a little bit harder to try and do that when you're on your person. But this way you can adjust this and see how this fits on the body. And then once you have that, I'd probably just take a safety pin with you and safety pin kind of where this ends up, and then at least stitch it down on that center front for the fit, so you can really see how the whole band fits. Because a bra fit doesn't just have to do with the cups, it has to also do with the band. So you want to make sure that the band is fitting you comfortably. Now sometimes when you have to open that up at the bottom, it can mean that you have to take it in at the top. But this is where you'll be able to figure that out, and this is why we assembled this in the different pieces, so you can attack and tackle each bit of the fit a little bit differently. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to tack this down, and what I'm going to do over here is I am going to, I'm going to just take a safety pin and pin this on here. So I'm going to take a safety pin and pin this just on here, just kind of keep it in place. And just one less stitch you have to rip out if you have to rip out any stitches. And you have pretty much done your test fit. Now I'm going to actually change cameras and I'm going to fit this on my dress form. Now know that a dress form is not a person. I made this for my sister. So my sister's going to come over this afternoon and I'm actually going to do an actual fit on her. She may not let me film her, but I will try and take pictures so I can show, at least in the fitting, how and where I may need to do some adjustments. Okay, so I've gone down and I've tacked that bridge. So I'm going to set this on her. This was your test fit. Hopefully you learned a few things in construction while you're doing this. And once you have figured out exactly what you need to do for your fit, then you can start working on the real pretty one